Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond the Cards, a Redbridge podcast, a monthly podcast covering the latest in payments news and deep dives into the topics we find the most interesting. It's definitely a good time, so we hope that you like it. Definitely do like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you are on YouTube so that you can be notified of our latest uploads. Joining us today, we have a really great crew of hosts. Obviously, me, who is talking right now, who is Dan Clare. I'm a senior director here at Redbridge. I'm also joined on kind of the Team US side of Beyond the Cards by Jasmine.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Willis, as Dan explained. I'm here with Beyond the Cards, and I am the payment associate on the US side, also joined by my European colleagues, Shira.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Jasmine. And I'm part of Red Bridge teams also. And I'm here with everybody talking about that. And I will let you introduce you, Gabriel.
All right. So, hi everyone. This is Gabriel Lucas, Associate Director here at Redbridge and mostly representing Europe with Shara. And really happy to be joining today's discussion on Beyond the Cards.
Well, rock on. It's a real Team US versus Team Europe discussion, just the way we like it. So I think we have some really interesting stories to talk about today. I know that we have some things to discuss, and definitely one is a really good kind of precursor to our main discussion today, which is, on microtransactions and the subscription economy. But I think we'll give some hot takes on these articles. So we definitely have a good one. We have Moody's take on buy now, pay later companies. And that comes from our friends at Payments Dive, as reported by Lynn Merrick. We have an update on instant payments in the EU. As I mentioned, we have that kind of, amuse-bouche on our main topic from Joe Williams, reporting from Protocol and Source Code. We have Twitter. I will never call it X, but I guess it's now known as X, is now registered as a money transmitter in 12 states. That's coming to us from Sarah Perez at TechCrunch. And then finally, before we get into our main topic, we have Daniel Klein's reporting from the street on Zulily actually closing, which is pretty big. So I guess let's start in on the article from Payments Dive, talking about Moody's take on buy now, pay later companies. I think it's really interesting because, and this is something that we've definitely talked about in the past, which is, buy now, pay later is not really anything new, but the access to it is really kind of what's new. And we've seen a lot of, definitely some growing pains in the industry. So, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's just really kind of following along the lines of, where are they really getting a lot of success, and like where really the challenges that they have, because it's like one of those things where it kind of progressed faster than it was ready to progress. But I'm interested in getting your guys' take on this story.
Yeah, I can maybe go next. So I think what is, as you were saying, Dan, is very interesting actually what is happening with buy now, pay later, because it's never been a real new service, but rather a new customer experience, new process, and especially new type of players that came in as opposed to the historical card networks and banks. So I think with the current situation, current, but you already started a while ago, with the interest rates really high, it was a matter of time that it became really, really complex for these buy now, pay later companies to struggle. And I think that's what we are seeing right now. So we saw Klarna's valuation dropping in a couple of days. And I think now it's the turn to either, as we are seeing in the article, consolidation, with some players becoming even stronger, but also with other more historical players, and also even the tech companies with Apple Pay and PayPal entering this area as well. So yeah, I think it's getting really interesting. But I think that to me the main conclusion of the article is that this type of service is getting to a really mature stage, where we are, barrier entries are really even non-existent, and so it's really getting mature. And so yeah, now I think companies have much more access to these type of services, and even consumers. So we'll see probably prices going down and players disappearing.
Yeah, and I think another thing is with, the take on that some of these buy now, pay later companies are having is whether to try, are they going to be staying independent, or, being picked up by some of these acquirers? Because in this article, as you've seen, some of these buy now, pay later companies, they take hits and they have to shut down because they're not being profitable. They're drowning. They're not making an effort to stay in the game as long as these other buy now, pay laters like Pioneer, who is a big one of the globalists, and I believe they're in Swedish. So they're having an issue and they're competing with each other. Some of these will not survive.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's really interesting that you see kind of, and I think it's kind of very common, right? You see the fintech disruption followed by more legacy players coming in, and those legacy players obviously have a lot more bandwidth to absorb losses, and they can potentially be more competitive when it comes to, pricing overall. I think that's always been the interesting consideration is, it's not like buy now, pay later is inexpensive for merchants to utilize, right? It comes with a higher acquisition cost. And so when you're looking at that perspective of like, okay, what is our acquisition cost of customers versus what we're paying to use this service? Does it really make sense at the end of the day? And I think, as governments continue to increase compliance on these companies, I think they were trying to operate in a world where compliance was not a big focus of theirs. And, as you see those increasing compliance costs, it just means that they become less competitive overall, especially as, there are challenges, I think, in any type of credit extension service with the fact that some people are just either going to miss payments or they're not going to pay at all. And obviously that harms the consumer's credit. But also, if you're a young company that's extending a lot of credit, right, you probably don't have the bandwidth to absorb a lot of those losses. And then I think it's also just a service that really kind of shrinks and grows with, the economy. If people are short on money, how are they going to kind of increase their buying power by utilizing these services? I mean, I definitely use them. I don't think I've ever bought a pair. Yeah, like I don't think I've ever bought a pair of running shoes that I haven't used Afterpay on. And I don't even know why I do it. Like I just am like, oh, it's there. It's not a big deal for me to use this. So I just do it. So I don't know.
You made a fair point then, because I think the experience is pretty cool. I've also used it a few times, and it's not really because I need it, but because I just wanted to play with this new, payment method. So I think for it to be, for me to keep using this sort of payment method while I don't necessarily need it, I would say that it's really key that it remains free as a service, which is not, which is gonna maybe change in the future, especially for some type of customers that are not paying on time. It could become like a premium service. What do you think, guys, on this?
Yeah,
Maybe. Oh, go ahead.
no, sorry, but the thing is that you're pointing something very interesting because we are just talking about ourselves as a regular consumer and customers. But the thing is that this is something that is more and more interesting, and this is more and more on the mind of B2B companies, and this is something very different when it comes to B2B companies, because this type of providers, as Jasmine mentioned, regarding, the different providers that are in competition right now as of today, but that are not that sustainable. And the thing is that maybe there is something that we have forgotten, is that even if habits are something, and they are very different from one another. I mean, when it comes to B2B using it, it's something else, because the different providers can differentiate themselves regarding different features such as credit scoring or something like that. But it's not that simple, and this is something that merchants have to investigate and to have to keep in mind, by the way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I definitely think that there's probably, a certain segment for B2B companies. You think about small businesses, access to credit, these may be the better choices for them, and they may be what they're choosing to select. And I mean, I think you see like PayPal credit, and like generally when I think of like true buy now, pay later, I think of like the 4 interest-free payments. But then there's somebody like Affirm who I tend not to see Affirm in kind of the 4 interest-free payment zone, as much as I see them more in like the longer term financing, right? And then for me, I'm making a calculated decision of whether the interest that Affirm is offering me is like less than my personal credit card. But I think if you're a small business, right, you really may need to kind of extend into that space. I also think just a really interesting aspect, right, is, it's very e-commerce, right? Buy now, pay later is like very e-commerce. I don't know if I've ever seen it at point of sale, but I would imagine that like if it were available at point of sale, it could really kind of change the dynamics of the situation, because you could have the ability to like pay for things actually while you're in store. I think that would require a lot of integration that I don't think is necessarily there, and I think it would require probably merchants to update a lot of their point of sale systems to be able to offer that as a payment. But it's a very e-commerce thing, and I think if it could bridge the gap more so into the kind of face-to-face
Cool.
retail space, yeah,
Yeah,
like it could be really different.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One company that already does the physical is Zip. So ZipPay will allow consumer to and also Afterpay. Not a lot of stores have this or updated their software or POS system to do this, but most of those buy now, pay laters, they'll give you a virtual card to where you can use it as the Apple Wallet and transfer to use it in store. So there are some companies that already have the ability to take those cards in person.
Oh, fascinating. I didn't know that. Learn something new every single day. But yeah, I mean, especially like That's a really interesting mechanism. I feel like I would want to know specifically like more about that, because it's like, all right, okay, if it's like a virtual card that's issued, right? Does it get put under like a private label bin, and therefore like it does come with higher interchange that can be associated under those private label bins? Because obviously as a face-to-face retailer, you're trying to maximize the fact that the face-to-face rates are as low as they can go. So if you're now kind of in the mindset of like, oh, this is a face-to-face transaction, it could be really difficult to track internally of, okay, where are we actually seeing this? Can we see this in our data of where we're seeing this, specific payment type being used, and like what are those acquisition costs match up to what our margin is for in store? So very interesting kind of considerations to be had here, but also just very interesting that Moody's, a major rating agency, is really starting to tell the tale that not all of these are something that maybe everyone should be rushing out and investing in, but very, very interesting.
Right. Now some of the larger banks are jumping over into the buy now, pay later because they can support that card network field. They actually issue those cards, like JP Morgan. They're more of a VCC virtual credit card. So I believe they're like any other merchant that uses VCC. You have a one-time card that these consumers that you give the consumers to pay in store, and then it's no longer useful after that one time.
Yeah. Team Europe, do you want to talk to us about what's going on with these instant payments and this Council and Parliament reach provisional agreement?
Yeah, that would be great. I don't know, Chad, do you want to say your thoughts on that?
So regarding instant payments, so they're going, there are a lot of initiatives going and incentivizing it a lot. So that's the reason why we see a lot of merchants going and looking for it. So that's the reason why this is something to have a focus on, as it's not only in Europe particularly, but this is something that really goes abroad Europe, even if Europe is very into it. And this is something that we can see, for example, in other countries, in other areas, geographical areas. And that's it. So, of course, this is something that are more interesting for the merchants, because they can better handle their everything regarding their cash management, but also in terms of risk, as it's a non-repudiable payment method. They're rather using it, and in Europe, a lot of the regulation goes and enforce this, and this is something that we see in a daily basis, that the merchants are really looking for that. The thing is that as of today, a lot of companies, for example, when it comes to instant payment, they don't offer that, or even if they offer that, they charge that. But this is something that is intending to disappear, and that is going in the benefit of the merchant as well as the consumer.
Well,
yeah, I would just add that what is very interesting here as well, is that a few years ago, instant payments was in Europe like the revolution, because now you can make a transfer in a matter of seconds instead of days. However, most of the banks, of course, to make their investment profitable and interesting, they really added a lot of fees on this service that is usually for free in most of the cases, at least for B2C consumers, but also in some cases for B2B when it comes to SEPA credit transfer, so domestic credit transfer in the European region. So the thing here is that the regulator realized, of course, they realized that this service is not really used as they would like to. So they are they agreed recently that this service will be offered for free. It will be mandatory for free for all the banks in Europe. And so that's, of course, very interesting, but also it will enable open banking to really arise as a payment method that is a clear alternative to cards in some use cases. Because as of now, the problem with open banking linked to instant payment is that as instant payment is not proposed by all the banks, and is some of them are charging the service, some others are not charging the service. So at the end of the day, is a problem in terms of customer experience and merchant experience. So nobody is really taking the risk of proposing something that is not clear. So hopefully with this new update from the European Parliament and the service getting free, open banking will also increase a lot in terms of market share and become the real alternative to cards. While, of course, waiting for the European Payment Initiative that is also being sort of linked with all these topics in Europe.
Gabriel, maybe we can precise something that is very confusing for people maybe for people hearing us, is that open banking does not mean instant payments. Can you please clarify just a little bit so that people get more information about that and about the fact not to confound it with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for making that point. So on the one hand, open banking is giving access. Basically, the idea behind open banking, there is, it happened in Europe, but it's not only a European thing, is making the banks or asking the banks to open their services with open banking. So asking the banks to open their services so that external banks or providers that are, of course, regulated can access this data and can consult the data, but also trigger certain transactions, such as wire transfers. So open banking itself is opening the banking services to third parties. And with open banking appeared the what is called in Europe payment initiation, which is triggering a payment, a payment request, as is already the case since many years for card, but for SEPA credit transfer, so for wire transfer. And while credit transfer historically had been done manually, where the payer still has to add the beneficiary of the wire transfer and then make the wire transfer. So open banking allows this process to be quite smooth and straightforward, because the merchant is requesting, or the payee is requesting the payment, and the payer is just validating the payment. On the other side, instant payment is a way to accelerate the settlement of the credit transfer. So, of course, when you couple both open banking and instant payment, it becomes a really powerful payment method, because the money is very smoothly initiated, the payment request smoothly initiated, and the payment and the funds goes straight away to the payee's bank account. Which is even faster than card payments, which takes at least a day to be funded. So I hope it makes sense. Basically, to summarize, open banking is getting access to banking services by third parties, while instant payment is making the settlement instant instead of taking a couple of days or a few days.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always understood kind of the primary goal of open banking is to essentially say, banks, you need to open your APIs so that anyone can choose to write to your API. Whereas, like, I think in the US, right, we don't really have those APIs open. They're very like party to party. So maybe you have a company like Plaid who has a lot of these, connections to a lot of banks who can offer open banking like services. It's not truly what from a European perspective as open banking, right? Because it's that individual company has made a lot of, single point connections to a lot of, financial institutions, and maybe financial institutions then come to them seeking that out. But, it's not open to everybody where, if I was sitting in my basement and I wanted to develop a cool payment app, I could go in and just, write to the 5 biggest European bank APIs and say, hey, I can offer you these services on these banks. I think the kind of scary thing that tends to kind of put a lot of people off with instant payments is the faster the payment moves, the more risk it inherently has if something is wrong or if it's a fraudulent transaction. So I see that, part of this clarification and some of these new rules is that there'll be a need to verify the beneficiary's IBAN and name actually match, in order to, alert the payer that, hey, this could be fraud. And I mean, I think we've seen in a lot of these instances of kind of non-card based electronic payments that there's increasing security standards over verifying that the person actually matches the name matches whose name is on the bank account or is like in ownership of it. Because, obviously I think that's where a lot of the danger comes in, and creating synthetic identities and trying to go and create fake bank accounts is a lot more difficult. But it'd be really interesting to see how fraud evolves in the world of instant payments, because like it's gonna happen. Like I don't think fraudsters are gonna sleep on a new way to, potentially try to route money away from the people that it's supposed to go to.
Yeah, I fully agree, because it's sort of we've seen how banking has been evolving towards cards, while cards were there for a while. And now, connecting to your bank account is almost like you have an ID and your password, and eventually you have the second factor authentication. But at the end of the day, it's like paying with your card. So yeah, as you were saying, we are now making the banking, electronic banking payments become more and more close to card payments, while the fraud aspect, the fraud management and risk prevention is not as developed as for cards. So yeah, we could say, or people developing those payment methods say that biometrics and strong customer authentication is part of the service. So it's sort of this like a 3DS by default. But yeah, fraudsters will definitely get there. I'm sure of that. And chargeback is, at least in Europe, chargeback for this sort of payment method is not something that is ready yet. There is no chargeback process. So in case you make an account-to-account transaction by mistake, or you get your account stolen, basically there is no process. So you will have to deal with your bank and also with the merchant. So but you don't know what you will get, because there's nothing written. So I'm sure this is part of what the European Union is trying to work on as part of the future PSD3, so the payment directive, the next payment directive. So yeah, but it will take some time.
Let's not talk about accounts being taken over. It's a sensitive subject.
I was just about to say, yeah, that sounds like the scary part. That sounds like the scary part when there's no, nothing in place when it comes to fraud. It's just like you're out in a limbo if something happens. I think that's the only thing about instant payments, going to kind of push you in the mind of we're in the US of Zelle and anything, where it's really hard to, if your account gets taken over, prove that, hey, I didn't send that. How do I prove that with that instant payments that this was either a fraudulent transaction or not? I believe you got to go through a whole bunch of hurdles. So in order to make this, have it be the best for consumers, is to implement a fraud procedure, or so this won't happen. It won't be an issue, because that can be a very issue. Like Dan said, it's scary, very scary.
And especially since it can happen so fast, right? Like,
Exactly.
you see fraudsters take, card numbers, right? And they load them into Apple Pay or Google Pay so that multiple people around, a specific geography can hit multiple points at the same time. So you have to kind of think of, if these and part of the benefit of, some of the more traditional transfers is they move slower so they can be stopped. And if we're working in an instant, right, up to 10 seconds, right, how much damage can get done before you even realize it's happening and try to stop it? So very interesting. I think I'm kind of glad Europe is going first in this. So we'll see what fraudsters in Europe do, and hopefully bring a lot of insight into kind of other global markets that are trailing a little bit here. But I don't want to talk about that anymore because it's a sensitive subject. So maybe let's talk about this next article that we have, which comes to us from Protocol. And I think it's a really good kind of starting taste of what we're going to be talking about as part of our main discussion, which is really, there are subscriptions, installment payments, you name it, whatever they want to take the form of, they're everywhere. But I think really the interesting thing is it's the price, right? Like, it's these, hey, subscribe to this, local newspaper, it's 99 cents a month, or like subscribe to this, it's less than $5 a month. You see other kind of like larger platforms, like especially two right off the top of my head are like Patreon and Nebula, right? Like Patreon, pay your favorite online content creators $2.99, right? And I think that there's a lot of, not only fatigue when it comes to that price point, but if you're thinking about it from a payments perspective, like those are low tickets, and a lot can happen, especially in the US, when those tickets start to get lower and lower. And I just have to think about, how really profitable are those subscription models when you have a low ticket, really depends on what card is being used. There's usually no alternative payment method offered. But then at the same time, there's high chargeback risk for it because, sure, you might not be, the value of the transaction might not be that much to you from a chargeback perspective, but like chargebacks are like rarely below $5. So, you get one chargeback against your $1.99 payment, right? You might not fight it, but you paid $5 for the incoming chargeback fine. So I think this is a really good kind of like precursor read of what we're talking about in terms of, what do we really mean when we're talking about these subscriptions, recurring services, and what do we really mean when we talk about, what is defined by micro, right? I don't know how much we want to go into this, considering it's the main topic of our conversation. So maybe we should we just park this and go on to my other favorite topic I love talking about.
I think as they kind of align in a little bit more so together, we can discuss them together if we want to do that. Just circle around, go either to Elon Musk and his Twitter.
You mean X, but I will forever call it Twitter.
Yes,
Yeah,
well, X versus Twitter, yes.
So TechCrunch came out with a really good article that they've been tracking where Twitter, now referred to as X has been registering as a money transmitter in multiple states. I think it's up to 12 now. And I just think that this is so fascinating because, one, I do not think of Twitter as any place that I want to transact money across at all. So it's really interesting that they're trying to get into the payments game. And I've heard rumblings that, X wants to become like a WeChat, right? It wants to be this super app where you can pay your utility bill and you can pay your friends, or you can make, payments to food delivery services all through one app. And
just like a PayPal.
I just like a PayPal, but I think really modeling more after like a WeChat type kind of super app. I don't know though, because like I said, I would be terrified to transact anything over this. I mean, there's so many major concerns that have to be had, and Twitter is, originally started by Jack Dorsey, who went on to go do Square, now called Block, right? There's maybe some latent payments DNA there, but I just don't really see it as transitioning into a trusted payments company, where you load your cards in there, you load your bank account information, and you just start paying people through it. I also think that there's a lot of especially when you think about, from a money transmitter, and especially from peer to peer, there's so much that you have to do from a regulatory standpoint in terms of sanctions by association, OFAC, right? I don't know if they would be able to bridge the gap on ensuring that people operating on their platform, aren't attached to terrorists or aren't attached to nefarious activity, especially because, as I think also this article details, right? There's a want to also leverage cryptocurrencies. And so, they don't have a stellar reputation for being used for super clean money. And so I just think that, especially with all of the struggles that they have just in terms of being profitable, is payments really an endeavor that you want to jump into right now? And two, do you have the trust factor?
Well, with that, the question is, it seems like I feel in a way with kind of researching everything, and he's trying to do what he did with X.com. And I believe that is kind of his way of changing Twitter to X, is really continuing his baby that he kind of birthed, that PayPal was like, no, this is not going to work. So they merged together back in the day. And now he has a way to where, okay, I have a better platform, which is Twitter. I bought Twitter. Now I can rebirth this X and now turn into a payment platform where I wanted to do in the first place, but it was a fail. So it's like, do you believe that Twitter, now X, has the backup that you need to turn this payment platform into what you wanted to create in the first place that failed in the beginning, that had turned into PayPal? That's the question that I have.
I totally forgot about that.
The thing is that we are dealing with Next.com, with somebody like Elon Musk, we are dealing with also cryptocurrencies, which are not used by, daily to daily basis customers. So this is something that can be huge. We are dealing also with somebody who has been able to completely change also the way, and the cost of the Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency just on one tweet, as it was said before it was x.com, So it's something, of course, that we should have a look at, by the way. And it's something that we shall consider also, even if we're not sure of the way it's going, but at the end, it's becoming something very, very different from what we are used to dealing with in a daily basis. But at the same time, it's something that may frighten some people also. So we should have a really good look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that there's so many more concerns that pop up once you get into the payments game because, again, to your point, like, who's even being allowed on this platform? How are we validating who these people really are and the accounts that they're attaching? Right? Like, it's always a challenge, especially whenever you're transmitting not only like P2P payments, peer to peer, but when you're actually trying to pay for like goods and services across this as well, right? You're going to run also into, okay, like, if you're going to be a payment services app, right, are you going to have the infrastructure to support like a merchant ecosystem? And then two, like, what are you doing from a compliance standpoint to make sure that those are valid merchants and you're not having money laundered across your platform? And maybe they're taking it really slow and they'll creep into it and start really light with maybe some peer-to-peer. But I just have a lot of like, I would never use it for that. And, I'm a long-standing user, but I would not trust that app I would not pay anybody over it.
Actually, one last comment on that. I think would be what I also heard, out the record recently as one of the rumors around Elon Musk is that he could be saying that he wants Twitter to become like a payment platform, but actually what he's trying to do is to add the payment component to the Tesla vehicle. So it's more, as part of the super app, having your very digitalized vehicle with payment capabilities in-house could be at some point, if we also think about autonomous vehicles, could be pretty powerful. So I don't know, maybe it could go this way or just nowhere or become like a PayPal competitor. We'll see. We never know with this guy.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think we definitely all plan on watching because it's just so fascinating to see what's really happening. And, like, sure, integrate with your Tesla vehicle, and then you're forget to update your expiration date in your card, and then all of a sudden your vehicle is bricked. Who knows? But I'd imagine we'd probably see some of those reports if that were the case. So not certainly something that you want. So let's pivot into our last story here, which comes to us from the street. Zulily is shutting its doors. It's digital doors, I guess you should say, because I don't, you can't really go into a Zulily store, I don't think. But I just think this is really fascinating because, generally you think of e-commerce as kind of lower overhead. It should be easier to maintain. But what I think is really interesting that gets brought up in this article, right, is when COVID happened, the kind of expectation was like, this is the catalyst, right? This is the catalyst to more NFC payments, more online, less people going into stores. And I think in general, is some validity to that, right? We've definitely seen a lot more options coming in, but also, e-commerce retailers are facing a lot of challenges from, a returns perspective, right? You're seeing companies just say like, just keep it, like, don't send it back to us. It's more expensive to send it back to us. But I think the interesting number that they cite in here is that, retail sales for digital were roughly around 15%. And then COVID, they jumped up to 20%, but then back down to 15%. So you have all of these kind of almost like boom and bust surges. And I think the challenging thing is again, you have established brick and mortar retailers doing better in e-commerce, right? Like, Walmart or Target or like Best Buy, right? So they put a lot of pressure on these e-commerce only companies to, one, really have to compete with what they're doing, but two, like, there's just so much infrastructure involved when a brick and mortar really steps strongly into the e-commerce space and throws their weight around. I just think it makes it more challenging, and it also, puts a lot of pressure on e-commerce companies, and I think that's why you also see people tending to gravitate more towards maybe marketplaces where there's a little less risk. But interested in on what you guys think about, what I consider, like, especially if you know anyone with children, like everyone with children shopped at Zulily. Now it's good. Now
I
it's gonna be
haven't.
gone.
Like, I haven't. Sorry, I haven't shot with Zulily.
Well, sorry,
I've heard of Zulily. I just never.
my niece was a model for them, so.
Oh. Yeah,
I don't know if you
it's
guys.
crazy because a lot of companies like Zulily are having issues right now in the e-commerce space and trying to stay afloat. There is we're living a hard time, especially when a lot of these e-commerce places, though, they're selling the same thing. And I think that goes into the consumers and also like the better quality and the price point of being competitors, right? And I think when a lot of more so have, again, all these e-commerce, they're coming and literally having the same vendors. They have the same thing. They're just different prices. And you may have the same thing, but with a different, better vendor and with better quality. So I'm surprised to see Zulily going under. And I also am surprised to see that they're finna get a lawsuit against them as well.
Yikes.
It is the yikes because one, you don't. It's like this. For one, I don't like seeing companies like this, going under, especially it's too close to the holidays. And then what happens to all of your customers, your faithful customers that's still there? What are you going to do, right? It's just like with the Bed Bath & Beyond Tuesdays, even though they were storefronts, but they had to almost close e-commerce as well because they're not doing as good as they used to.
Yeah, interested to see, like, do you guys see this? Is there like a really big struggle for e-commerce retailers in Europe as well?
Yeah, so I didn't get the first part of the article, but so yeah, what I could say in terms of marketplaces in Europe is that it's definitely become a few years ago the top trend, and is now like every single retailer is becoming or has become a marketplace. However, what we see is that I think has just been what we're saying. We see the same products everywhere. So at the end of the day, where is the value added from those marketplaces, if not just having an account with them and maybe some customer experience? But at the end of the day, there is almost no differentiation for customers in terms of products. And it's even bringing some confusion in terms of product offering for each merchant, because if we can find the same products everywhere, then pricing eventually and a little bit customer experience is the only difference. And then, as also you were saying, on the other hand, we have like the real merit on the vendor look-in, because if you're selling all your products to marketplaces or even one single big marketplace, in case something happens, in case you're no longer happy with your marketplace, your power of negotiation is almost zero, because you are the small player dealing with a very, very big player. We can mention Amazon, but it could be anyone, any marketplace, any big retailer. So yeah, I think we are seeing pretty much the same in Europe in terms of trend, and also in terms of issues and the future that we can expect as part of marketplace. So I would say on the other hand, so this is rather negative, but at the same time, I think someone can really bring additional services, experience, and as part of this could be payment methods and the payment facilities that you can propose. Definitely marketplaces can be a better place to buy. And so I think marketplace should differentiate from everything else as in terms of offering verticals. So I think something that could evolve in the future is really focusing on specialized marketplaces rather than general marketplaces where we see any sort of product. But yeah, interesting to see how this ecosystem evolves. If new players will come in, or if they will rather disappear, and marketplaces will again concentrate on the same big players. What do you think, Shara?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. This is this is the same trend we see in Europe. I mean, people from, of course, we learned a lot from COVID, and this is something we were not expected at all. No matter whether there are merchants, no matter whether we were in the place of merchants or in the place of providers, this is something that we were not expected at all. But the thing is that I have the feeling that we saw that as a trend, by the way, and it shall have been considered as a trend only because at the end, the thing is that we all know that it's something that we are used to seeing. Also, I mean, if there is something, if there are some actors, we saw that Amazon distinguished themselves also during this period, and that everybody was going on that type of trend, doing as a marketplace, etc. The thing is that it's as usual. I mean, the offer and the demand is not the same, and it's a loss of balance between them that leads to such. I think that for this example in particular, I think that this is a lack of balance at the end, and that also that's the reason why we are looking at some. We are seeing that people are now, as customers, are more and more interesting, not really in general marketplace, but in specialized marketplace where we could find something unique. And this is not, for nothing that we see that for example, some influencers saying that they have found the same product at different places, at different marketplaces, for different prices. And I'm not sure that this is something we should, that the model by itself is a little bit used, and it is not really appropriate right now. And that people, and that merchants that have the ability to do something else on marketplace have better to do it and find something else to distinguish themselves.
Well, I think those are all really good points, and I think we have a lot to say about marketplaces, and I think stay tuned, because I feel like we have a couple more episodes talking specifically about marketplaces. But let's shift back to our main story, because I think, one, I'm just so interested in just the economics of these subscription models. And again, like, my brain instantly thinks, I've been in this space for a really long time of, okay, you're going to offer this subscription. You need to be able to support all of these different aspects of recurring billing, but like, are you paying like 10% of that transaction value in just processing costs alone? And then after that, what do you have left to pay for? So I think what's really interesting as we look at that, not only from that price point perspective of, yeah, it's attractive, like, am I gonna subscribe to my favorite newspaper for 99 cents a month? Yeah, probably. But if I put in my debit card for that, right? Like and if it's regulated, that's 22 cents out of that 99 cents that's going to just processing fees. Like, that's a huge chunk. So I'm just very interested in like when these kind of direct to consumer businesses, which I think are generally more so in the subscription space, like, are people factoring in the cost of payments when they're thinking up that actual price point? My answer is no. I don't think that they do. I think they should.
Yeah, it's very interesting then, because we're used to hearing from, for example, and even providers, from payment providers, some when talking about different payment methods, when talking about, they usually have the same arguments, to go in a new payment method, which is mostly for example, the conversion rate, and not the acceptance rate, but not the acceptance rate, but more the conversion rate. But they tend to forget how much it can cost them to put that in,
Yeah, and that's an important distinction, right, between conversion and acceptance rate. So like conversion rate would be, using your marketing and advertisements, how many people are actually clicking through and signing up, right? That's your conversion. And then you have your acceptance rate, which is how many times is that transaction approved on the first time, right? We know that in e-commerce and card not present spaces, the acceptance rate is already lower. And so now you have so much more abandonment risk of, hey, if your transaction fails for a subscription that's $2.99 a month, are you just as a consumer going to be like, well, I didn't really need it, I don't care, so I'm just going to move on, right? That price point heightens every aspect of being able to grab onto not only a high conversion rate, but a high acceptance rate, and then the ability to maintain that acceptance rate over the long term, because your monthly recurring revenue is so tied to that acceptance rate.
Totally, then, and that's the reason why the providers, instead of talking about conversions rate, which is something that they tend to have the merchant, to be able to work with, is rather the merchant shall ask himself what is, in terms of acceptance rate, what is it, what it brings, to have this payment provider, and what it brings to work with it.
Yeah, and I think there's also kind of this, I think I would say to some extent, right? Some of these companies are younger. They may be more like tech focused, and so these are things that not really, play into their calculus. And I think we have all seen providers offering services that help recover potentially failed transactions. And, those types of services are obviously very attractive in these, low ticket subscription models. But at the same time, it's like you're just adding more cost to a value of a transaction that potentially you're not really getting a lot of, especially if those kind of recovery models, if they're not percentage based, like what if they're a per item basis, right? Like you're paying a lot of money at that per item level because you don't have the higher ticket to offset that amount. I also just think people are going to get tired of it, right? Like how many subscriptions can you really maintain? And so you have another statistic popping into your models, which is churn.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of chargebacks come from too when it comes to subscriptions, because you do a subscription for so long and then you forget about them. I mean, I have a lot of subscriptions that I look at by time I look at my statements, I'm like, I forgot about this. I have over 20 subscriptions and I end up canceling about 5 of them because I don't have no use for them anymore. So subscriptions can be a high risk market as well.
Well, and I think with just being able to maintain subscription services, right? I think that's where kind of the part account updater network token really start to come into the conversation, because again, the name of the game is keep people on the subscription. Don't give them any notice or reason or alert that they're still paying for something. Because I think there's always an element of this price point that's like, if it is small enough, it will get forgotten.
That is definitely true, especially those little $2.99 stragglers, those like I just realized I have Amazon Audible. I don't use Audible at all. Like, oh, okay, why is this here? I've been paying. I mean, that's not a little on the lower side. It's like $16.99, but I didn't realize I was paying it for the course of for the last year. And with my Amazon Prime app stuff, so I didn't know. It's a lot of things there where I feel like consumers, that's when businesses can get the risk, flag because of consumers like me, and I am guilty of one of them. Keep those, and then all of a sudden I'm like, nope, this is not me. I don't want it anymore. Just shut it off.
Well, and I think that's where like the optionality of subscription sometimes I think is kind of lacking, right? Like sometimes it's like you have the option to pay monthly or you can pay for an entire year. And it's like, well, maybe I don't want to pay for an entire year, but I want to pay every quarter. Because like I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with the subscription model, right? Like we all go to gyms, we all use video streaming platforms, right? We're all accustomed to paying for things that we use. But I think when it's such a small number, does it actually even work better to be a less frequent occurrence? And I think that's something that people looking or operating in the subscription model have to kind of take into consideration of, how many different options are we going to be, supply? Can we maintain and properly bill those options when we need them to? And then also, what is the attrition rate when we use different charge models of, say, like maybe it's every 6 months or maybe it's every year? Kind of those upfront payments, and then how do you maintain them? I guess I'm rambling, but the more frequent you charge somebody, the easier it is to control, but the less frequent, the higher the risk that a card is compromised or your token is no longer valid and you have to replace it using some sort of update service.
Yeah, I think, guys, you're also bringing up so the topic of, I mean, it's not only a matter of recurring payments, but how you deal with turn, as you said, sooner than. And I think there are also other alternatives when it comes to micro payments, micro transactions, as prepayment or post-payment. So everything regarding account management. That of course it doesn't come with accounts, but it could be a good alternative to reduce the number of transactions. So on the one hand, you can reduce first the cost because you're reducing number of transactions, and on the other hand, you can reduce churn and the chances that you have to get declines because you reduce the number of transactions. So you can put more emphasis on getting the customer account top up or getting the customer account debited following the whatever the business model. So I think, as a matter of fact, microtransactions have been mostly growing on digital environments, on recurring businesses, but maybe there are some other alternative models that could be looked into.
Yeah, and these alternative models can have the success they deserve only with and thanks to strong analytics and reporting capabilities, which is most of the time something that lacks on the merchant side. So this is really something that the merchants who proposes this kind of payment method should focus on also, because by knowing better your customer, it's not it seems that it's something obvious, but knowing better your customer makes you lose less money and even earn more money too.
Yeah, I definitely think you're spot on with the need for even better analytic and being able to really cross-reference all of those different data points and put a meaningful story together of like, what is this data showing us? And then of course looking at the cost, because I think the other thing that you see is, these subscriptions are going up in cost, right? And so, when you decide as a business to cross out of the micro kind of territory and go into kind of a higher, more premium price point for your subscription service, right? One, you're going to have some losses on that, but also it starts to change the calculus a lot. And I don't know if people really do look at it that closely. I mean, we see in other news headlines that a lot of these kind of companies do struggle overall with like profitability, and I just think you have to be cognizant of your payment cost, and there's so many decisions that weigh in of a lot of alternative payments can bring down the cost, but I think the alternative is when one of those payments fail, they're usually like very costly when they fail. Like think of a returned ACH transaction. Like usually a company is like, hey, if we go to debit your account and you don't have the money, we're charging you the $15 or the $25 that we're going to incur for that transaction failing. So unless you're effectively able to shift that cost back to the consumer for their error, like you can't absorb that because you take a $25 return to ACH and it's going to eat up a ton of successful payments. So I just think it's a very interesting space to watch. And I do think like looking into 2024 here, I think maybe we'll see in early 2024, it'll really still keep up at the current trend. But I have to feel that it's going to start to wane and we're going to see people really changing these models and being less focused on the MRR and really focused more on just not creating so much customer churn, because every day there's a new subscription service coming at you for like $2.99, and why not just do a flat dollar amount at that point?
Yeah,
Like,
at that point, and then they, they try to do these promotions to bring consumers back even after they cancel the subscription. Oh, get another 2 months free, and then this amount after. Or for instance, Stars right now they're doing a promotion. They're like $10, basically $9.99, but what they're doing is if you were a subscriber or want to be new, it's $2.99 for the next 3 months, and then after that it goes back up to the regular price. I mean, and that can gravitate some of these consumers over to watch their favorite show for a certain amount of seasons. Then after that, it's like, oh, I don't want it anymore. So I think they have to come up with a strategy to cap the cancellations, to kind of decease that.
yeah, I mean, I think that's where it's really interesting to look into like the chargeback and fraud data for these types of merchants of, okay, like, are all of your chargebacks customer service related, or because you charged someone when they actually had canceled previously, and like, what is your win rate and what are you spending on that? Because I just think it's very easy to see that you can burn a lot of money on the maintenance of these faster than you're actually bringing it in, potentially, or at least to some extent not creating the margin that you would want to create on those. And again, it really comes down to being able to effectively analyze your payment methods and analyze your costs. I think network tokenization is great, but from what I've seen, it's not free and it's usually more expensive. So I think looking at how the payment service providers are going to offer network tokenization and how they're going to assess fees for it are also going to change, what price point these get set at.
That's accurate. That's a good question. That's a good interesting topic as well. And then, I mean, like you said earlier, it kind of coexists with microtransactions when it comes to fraud. Because how can you stop that in a way?
And are you going to notice
microtransactions is very risky?
Yeah, I mean, because exactly, like, are you going to notice it, right? Like, $2.99 is hard to notice in the grand scheme. And if you have a lot of subscriptions, you might not notice that, something was compromised. And also, like, thinking of it from the flip side is, one, as a company, you are incentivized to let as many people through the door as possible, right? Because that's the name of the game. You have to make up in volume what you're not charging for in terms of a price point. But fraudsters are, nasty hunters, right? They're looking for sites that have lower precautions to go and either take advantage of by testing a whole bunch of cards or sneaking things through that they don't think will get caught. So we think there's, the other aspect of, and I know it's something that definitely on the European side and strong customer authentication side of things, right, is, are you letting the right people through the door in the first place? Because especially in merchants I've worked with that have been dealing in the subscription space, right? A big metric that they think about is lost revenue that they think that they were going to get. And I think there's sometimes some misguided thought process around all of that revenue is valid revenue, and maybe a portion of it is actually fraudulent revenue that you're not supposed to have. So you're factoring in some portion of revenue into your kind of lost revenue metrics that was never supposed to be there in the first place. And that can really, muddy the waters of how you're trying to manage your subscriptions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so first, one comment on the European regulation is that actually microtransactions are below the threshold of 30 euros. There is the minimum threshold to get an exemption for low value transactions. So strong customer authentication or 3D secure is not mandatory for those transactions, which increases, of course, the risk. But at the same time, I think compliance itself is a huge topic for microtransactions. While we can consider that small amount transactions are something easy to take and not very risky, is rather the opposite. First, because you, as you guys are saying, you can get a lot of chargebacks very easily that you are not really anticipating at all, which can be much more costly than the margin that you're making out of those transactions. But also, at some point, you could also get sanctions and fines from the networks, card networks, Visa, Mastercard, and even you can get your activity shut down completely without, from one day to another, without anticipating it at all. And also, I think microtransactions are usually an area for money laundering. So it's not even the sector, the industry that is risky, as it could be in some sectors that are rather regulated, like gambling or gaming, but it is actually a very good place for money laundering, because you can basically, the use case to launder your money is that you top up your account or you pay for something and then you ask for a refund, and the refund, with the refund you get a proof of the funds coming to your bank account from a legitimate source. So of course it can be tracked and it should be raised to the authorities, but it's a typical use case for money laundering that this type of companies should be aware of, if they don't want to be bothered by regulators from as from card networks from one day to another.
Yeah, I mean, Visa Compelling Evidence 3.0 definitely has some higher thresholds, especially if you're operating in this space of what you need to capture from those transactions in order to have successful representments as well. So, I think it just goes to the overall conversation of really easy to jump into the microtransaction subscription space, shockingly more difficult to actually manage successfully and extract the value that you need out of that payment stream to really effectively use it. And maybe that's a good topic to close this out on. Definitely interested to see if we get any comments or follow-ups related to this. But, these are the types of topics that we plan on talking about, these kind of fun, extraneous topics. So we hope that you will join us for our next episode, which we intend to cover another really exciting topic, which would be fraud in social media marketplaces. Ooh.
Ooh, lovely.
Ooh.
I know.
Great.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. We hope to hear from you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, everyone.